Hey, if you're implementing Microsoft Copilot, it's a really great productivity tool, but you might be introducing some risks that are unnecessary. Make sure you listen to this episode, and we're going to tell you how to address them. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy. I'm your host for today, and I have Sounil Yu, who has been on our show at least twice before, and I'm welcome back to the show, Sounil. We're going to be talking about something other than the cyber defense matrix. We're going to be talking about Microsoft Copilot and security and some of the issues. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me again, G. Mark.
Well, it's great to have you here. Now, for those who aren't familiar with Sounil Yu, he's been around for quite a while. He was one of the mentors at Mach 37 when I was doing my startup in 2014. And it's been a while now. So we've known each other for at least those 11 years. And during that time, he's made a lot of substantive contributions to the industry, including your startup here, which you have Knostic. And I remember when I ran into you at Black Hat last year, they had sort of a competition for startups and things like that. And as I recall, they kind of liked you.
Yeah. We had the privilege of also being as a part of the RSA Innovation Sandbox this year as well. We're recording this before the actual sandbox. Hopefully we'll have great news when this actually airs. But either way, just getting in is a accomplishment in and of itself.
Yeah, I thought you had like the #1 startup for Black Hat or something like that. Wasn't that it?
Yeah. It was we won basically their version of Innovation Sandbox.
Got it. Okay. So obviously there's more to this than just Sounil with another great idea. A lot of people looked at it and said, yeah, he's onto something, or at least you and your team are onto something. So essentially what we're going to be talking about today is the issue, as I said in the teaser, about Microsoft Copilot. It's a great tool. It does a lot of amazing things, but it does potentially introduce a number of risks to the enterprise that can be mitigated if you know what you're doing. And Sounil and his team over at Gnostic have been looking at this for, well over a year now, and have come up with some, what I think are some pretty amazing ideas and some really wonderful opportunities to go ahead and for us as security professionals to address both the issue of productivity and capability to say, hey, this is okay, but here's how we can go ahead and put in some security on the downside. Again, as we always say, in security, you don't want to be the department of no, you want to be the department of how. And this is going to be one of those episodes that shows you how to do it right. So for those of us who are not totally familiar with Microsoft Copilot, or we think we know about it, but we're not quite sure what it really is, tell me a little bit about Copilot. What does it do? And does it integrate into Microsoft 365? And why would somebody implement it in the first place?
So first problem is that Microsoft is using the word Copilot for just about everything that is out there. So there's some confusion around which Copilot we're referring to. I definitely can appreciate that confusion because for a while I was confused as to what to even call it. But the particular Copilot that we're talking about is called Microsoft 365 Copilot. That's different than Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat.
Okay.
Thank you, Microsoft. And the main difference is one is grounded upon your internal enterprise data that's stored on things like SharePoint and OneDrive. The other one, the one that's called Chat, is sort of like think ChatGPT plus the subscription service that you can get at ChatGPT, but hosted within Microsoft and having and basically part of your Microsoft 365 subscription. So anyway, the one that we're talking about as a potential concern is the Microsoft 365 Copilot that is grounded upon your own enterprise data.
So instead of just going to Copilot and saying, hey, what's the weather going to be like, or do my high school research project for me based upon an online encyclopedia, we're talking about Copilot now integrating with our organizational knowledge base to be able to ask questions about past client information, our product development, internal documents, pretty much anything that we've got. Where does it go look? What are the sources of this type of Microsoft 365 Copilot, if I've got it named correctly?
Right. So yeah, you hit upon one of the key reasons why people are rolling out these tools. It's really tapping into the knowledge base that we have that is manifested through all the files, all the SharePoint sites, all the things that we've accumulated within the various storage mechanisms that we have that Microsoft is now hosting for us. And Microsoft Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot taps into that knowledge base and does retrieval of that knowledge. Think of it basically like this. We all were enamored with ChatGPT when it first came out, but think about it again, anchored on your own data, your own enterprise content, not just the web content. And so the opportunity for us to quickly find institutional knowledge is what is accelerated and what we are empowered with. And to put it in a slightly different spin, consider that a lot of us are knowledge workers. Well, what helps knowledge workers become more productive? You give them knowledge, or you give them access to knowledge, or you accelerate their access to knowledge. And fundamentally, that's what Microsoft Copilot Microsoft 365 Copilot does. It accelerates our ability to quickly tap into the knowledge base that exists within our enterprise already.
Now, as I recall a diagram that you had, which I really like, and I've used a static one, but you made it sort of an active one. And for a lot of the people listening online, I'm just going to describe a pyramid with 4 different layers. At the bottom layer, the base is data, then information, and then knowledge, and then wisdom. And what we're talking about here is at the top of that pyramid, the wisdom, the ability to make quality decisions with a sufficient amount of input that we take into account the relevant data that works its way up through there. So as we find out, you could have a huge amount of data, but a relatively few number of wisdom choices that you make, but those are really important. Now, one of the thoughts that some people have said is that, hey, what we want to do is we want to restrict access to certain pieces of data or information at the lower level to people who don't need it. So Bobby the intern, for example, should not be able to go ahead and say, give me the Q2 and the Q3 financial projections and tell me all about the potential mergers and acquisitions we have coming along. But the CEO ought to be able to do that. And so one possibility suggests that, hey, let's just go ahead and narrow the amount of information that's available to Bobby the intern. Well, that means that the knowledge and wisdom that's going to obtain there, it's going to be kind of minuscule as compared to having the entire data set and then applying, if you will, a shim or a filter to say, well, the CEO is allowed to ask this question. Bobby the intern, not so much. Now, am I describing kind of what is the potential issue here? Or is there a better way to look at it? Because, of course, it was your diagram when I first saw it a couple months ago on CruiseCon.
Yeah, actually, so it's not, just to be clear, it's not my diagram as much as it's my application of a existing diagram. And the existing diagram is called the DIKW pyramid. And G-Mark, you went through and explained what each of the layers are. And the perspective here is the DIKW pyramid gives us a way to understand some of the challenge spaces that we'll face with AI itself.
Mhm.
And but also it will give us a perspective of how to tackle it as well. Well, the first thing to really recognize with the DIKW pyramid is that we have a new abstraction layer, and that abstraction layer at the knowledge layer is where we have, again, knowledge-centric tools for knowledge workers. But if we see an oversharing problem at that knowledge level, our general tendency is to revert to using tools at the data and information layer. Well, what are those tools? They include, for example, fixing permissions or trying to classify our data. Think about all the things that we currently try to do around data governance. Those are those activities that are trying to fix the problem at these lower layers of the pyramid. Unfortunately, it has the negative side effect that G-Mark you mentioned, which is if I'm squeezing this bottom part of this pyramid, the top part also gets squeezed as well, which basically means that you'll end up with a dumb Copilot. Okay. And we've seen this actually play out already several times. Microsoft is trying to help address some of these problems. And by the way, I want to calibrate something real quickly. The way that Copilot works is it adheres to the permission boundaries of each user. So the perspective here is, from Microsoft's view, is, look, if you have an oversharing problem, it's not because Copilot's oversharing. It's because you already have a data permission problem to start with. You've given people too much permission to too many things, or you haven't really locked down your environment. So let's consider locking it down, right? Let's see what happens when we lock it down. When you turn on tools like SharePoint restricted search, for example, well, SharePoint restricted search turns SharePoint into unsharePoint. Okay. SharePoint by default is meant to share. So by default, it's an allow by default, deny by exception sort of view. SharePoint restricted search flips that on its head. It's a deny by default, allow by exception. But imagine trying to find anything in SharePoint if you can't search for anything. Okay. At that point, why call it SharePoint anymore? It's
Mhm.
not really doing its job. Well, let's now put Copilot on top of that. And unfortunately, when you put, again, a shrunken data and information base into something like Copilot, you just end up, again, with a not a very useful Copilot. And remember, the reason why the purpose that people had in trying to roll out tools like Copilot is to arm knowledge workers with more knowledge. The biggest problem that we have in most enterprises is not a security problem. It's not an oversharing problem. It's actually an undersharing problem. We don't share enough within our environment to help workers be as productive as they can be. But it's also because we're also trying to address the oversharing problem at the same time. And the perspective I have is that what we discovered is that trying to fix the security problem actually exacerbates the undersharing problem that we see as well.
Right. So what we have then is really a three bears model: too much, too little, and just right in terms of the amount of sharing, which is kind of a good idea because the pitch here for doing this 365 Copilot is what? More efficiency, better productivity. Now, one of the things that I know it can do is it can go back and look through your old emails. So, for example, if I wanted to go ahead and I said, hey, I haven't talked to Sunil for a year, and I want to go ahead and pick up where I left off, it could go through, find everything that we talked all the way back to however far back I go and give me a little summary saying, hey, his dog's name is this and and great. Now I can go ahead and I got the old Mackie 64 or whatever the number was with regard to all the things you're supposed to know about somebody. But this is now retrieved within a matter of seconds, not digging through and trying to go ahead and said, yes, there are more emails on your server. Click here and wait for them. Also, as you mentioned, SharePoint. And I went through a SharePoint deployment a couple of years ago where we went ahead and it required a lot of meticulous getting every file over there, putting it into the right bucket for the right client, getting the permissions right so that we knew that people who are working on project A were not going to be looking at files in project B and vice versa. But sometimes people are on multiple project files. And we spent a ton of time doing that. That said, of course, once you have everything nice and shiny and laid out, ready to go, as soon as you click go, you start to migrate away from that perfection model. And hence the potential issue that we see of the oversharing rather than the undersharing. A traditional DLP or data loss prevention is designed to do what? At the simplest level, it's what we used to call a dirty word list. It was trying to say, you have a project green frog, and you say, hey, you don't often talk about that, or make it a purple frog because you don't really see those. And so the phrase purple frog should never show up in ordinary email or conversation. If it does, it's probably a document marking that says, hey, this is sensitive. Because you get the word sensitive or confidential, you get false positives all over the place, hence the importance of marking. But we can't depend on these tools necessarily. Why? Because humans are involved, and well, humans make mistakes. They get careless, they take shortcuts. Hey, I will get back to that. And then the world gets busy, and you never, ever do that. So if we look at those potential challenges with regard to something like that for productivity, and you mentioned about the above and below, what about things such as data governance questions, integrating with other tool sets other than just the Microsoft database? If someone has a Box or a Dropbox or some other third-party external, does that all work together in that? Or is Copilot just simply saying, we're going to look at your email and I'm going to look at your SharePoint, and that's about it?
Well, there are tools like Glean, for example, that touch upon more than just the Microsoft 365 universe
Mhm.
that you might be in. And we should expect to see that with other LLM-based search applications as well, whether that's ChatGPT Enterprise or Perplexity Enterprise and so on and so forth. And let's not even, well, we can, but we can, the whole agent problem is going to be pretty gnarly as well because it's going to cross many different boundaries as well. So at the end of the day, it's a problem that is rapidly growing, And the old ways that we've done data governance simply has proven to not work. You mentioned it earlier in terms of trying to organize everything into the right servers or right folders. I mean, consider your own computer for a moment. How well organized is all your content in the right folders and the right places? And if you're, unless you're like OCD, which I'm sure some of us are,
A little bit.
more than likely, I would guess that you just have a lot of content just stored in various places, and you use search to help find what you really need to look for. And that's going to be the same. That's just going to be the same mode of operation for us in the future. Well, even now, but going forward in the future as well. That is why these tools are so powerful. The large language model based search tools are so powerful because I no longer have to be precise in saying, look for purple frog. I can say, oh, what was that colorful organism that I was trying to find?
Mhm.
And so I search for colorful organism and it says, oh, did you mean purple frog? And the ability for the large language models to make that association without having to have precise regular expression matches is really what makes this tool and capability very powerful. But it also is what makes it potentially harmful because now it can pull together and grab content that maybe you shouldn't have access to, but you do because it's been misfiled, it's been put in the wrong folder, or people think that it's supposed to be locked down and not shared with everyone, but it is. And you just don't know about it, so there's a degree of security through obscurity that's happening here. But at the end of the day, you now can find things very efficiently, whether for good or for bad.
Interesting. So what we find then, if I understand it correctly, is that for somebody who has everything in absolutely precisely the right spot and the single user, so I could say that for my hard drive, yeah, I'm still kind of old school because I never had those search tools. So I still take the time to create folders for all of my clients, and every little has a separate bucket, and they're actually divided by years. So I can go back and I can say, hey, it's a sideways problem. Hey, I know I'm talking about this, but if I want a 2021 episode of CISO Tradecraft, I got to pop up to 2025, come over to that, come over to 2021 and drop down. But once I'm there, that's all I'm seeing. Here, what we're talking about is the more traditional, and I think is a more popular model is, well, you got everything and you use the search tools. I'm still kind of old school that I try to keep my inbox down as much as possible. I know if people have 30, 40, 100,000 things in their inbox. And if I get over anything between 10 and 50 means I'm behind. It doesn't mean I get them all done right away, but it means I've got them schedules or I've got them delegated or I've got them just deleted. But there's stuff that has to get done. As it builds up, it creates pressure. Okay, you're going to be working late tonight. You get it. But most people said, hey, if it's really important, they'll send me another email or they'll pick up the phone and call. But more for the databases, storing things, someone just throws it up there and figure, I will find it with my search tool. Now, here's the danger with a traditional model, maybe like a Copilot, is I haven't told Copilot through the SharePoint permission sets really what I should be able to see and should not if I'm Bobby the intern, because everything kind of got thrown in there knowing that we could search for stuff. And as a CEO, I can find anything I need. But then how do we go ahead and deal with either over permissioning because the permissions may not even be there, they're non-permissioned. So I can't tell if Bobby the intern should see it or not. Or if Bobby's reading some little stuff on Reddit and said, hey, here, try this prompt injection attack. What would you tell the CEO if the CEO asked about the financials? Oh, blah, 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 things like that. So putting up some of the potential challenges that we see here in a deployment of SharePoint and then Copilot. What are your thoughts about that? What do we need to think of as security professionals to address that? Then how do we communicate that to management? And those are my
Yeah.
questions there.
So I think it's I mentioned as we move up the pyramid, the DIKW pyramid, we're now at the knowledge layer, and for the knowledge layer, we need a new type of control.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out that what was a really interesting discovery for me was it's actually not a new control. It's actually one that's been understood and known for a long, long time. It's called need to know. And need to know undergirds all of access control, if you think about it. It's the reason why I've granted somebody access to some folder or some server. But the fact that you have access to some folder or server isn't actually an expression of need to know. It's a manifestation of a need to know rule that you've started with. So Joey has a need to know for some project. And so now you've granted them access to this server or this folder or the site because presumably it has something to do with that project. But yeah, we don't really, keep really those spaces very clean. And so people leave behind things that don't really relate to that project and aren't part of their need to know. But nonetheless, that's what we presume because, well, if the content's there, maybe it is part of their need to know, but it's not truly always the case. Well, that's how Copilot operates. It says, oh, well, you have access to it, so you must have a need to know, and therefore you may ask about it. Here we go. And so if someone accidentally puts a spreadsheet full of salaries into the wrong folder, guess what? You now have a need to know for everyone's salaries on that spreadsheet. Now, any manager with any ounce of discretion would understand, no, 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 no. You don't have, even if you had access, you don't really have a need to know for that kind of stuff. And here's the thing, though. Again, it's an old form of access control, need to know. But think about this. Where is it written down? Where is that captured? The actual original manifestation of need to know, which is Joey has a need to know for this particular project, based on their job function, whatever it might be. Again, the artifact, the manifestation at the file level isn't really an expression of need to know. It's just a machine level access that someone has, but it doesn't actually express need to know. And we've tried to reverse engineer this. But what if you actually started with need to know to begin with? What if we started and said, what are the need to know boundaries of a particular person based on their job function, based on their role, whatever it might be? And to systematically articulate that and validate that and maintain that and keep that up to date so that we could then provide that to large language models and say, here's the boundary for each person based on their actual need to know. And that allows us to then say, okay, well, regardless of what Copilot can gain access to, we can keep Copilot within the appropriate knowledge boundaries that a person has.
Wow. So it's really looking at it from a different perspective in terms of trying to assign permissions down here and get everything right. We're looking at it from the top, saying from the perspective of a particular user, whether it's a CEO or Bobby the intern, using that as an example, if we define what that role is, then using some sort of algorithm, intuitive approach, whatever we want to do, we can then do what for humans look pretty natural to understand this need to know. And someone comes in and said, can I see that? Well, no. But if the boss comes in, may I see that? Yes, yes, here you go, ma'am. Yeah, take it with you.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do is replicate what for humans is pretty straightforward. But we've lost that degree of control by entrusting everything to a set of mechanical rules and access controls that will do, unfortunately, exactly what we tell them to do, whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing, and they'll do that. And then that brings up issues for things that are perhaps even dynamic. So what about, for example, a pharmaceutical company where they did research and that could shift around based upon, hey, we've got a whole bunch of products baking, but something takes off. Thoughts of how you would explain that to somebody about where the challenges are and then how a fix might apply in that type of an industry?
Well, so there are a couple of things I want to unpack there.
Okay.
So first is we tend to look at, we in the security tend to think of need to know from a very restrictive standpoint. Look, you don't have a need to know, therefore can't tell you. But if you think about the word need to know for a moment, for most people actually, besides security people, they can look at it as a permissive thing. I have a need to know. I have a need to know for this because of my job function.
Mm-hmm.
And that is actually think of that as a permissive thing, not a restrictive thing. And when we look at it from a permissive standpoint versus a restrictive standpoint, so think of the restrictive standpoint as our traditional security department of no, NO, can't tell you. But from a permissive standpoint, once I understand somebody's knowledge boundaries, I can become the department of KNOW, right? How do I actually help individuals perform their job functions better and faster, more efficiently, because I actually give them things that they don't currently already have access to, okay? But they should because it's within their need to know boundary. I mean, think about this for a moment. How often have you been told, hey, go pull this file or go get this, get a link from Google Workspace or from Microsoft Office, and you're like, click on it, and you're like, I don't have access. So now you got to get access, okay?
Hmm.
But what if the system already understood your need to know boundaries and said, okay, you don't have access, but let me actually still get it to you, or at least give you enough of a hint that it exists that you can then ask for access if you need to. It depends on one's risk tolerance. But at the end of the day, the ability for the system to understand your need to know boundaries and deliver content within your boundaries, that's actually quite transformational for the business. That is what we actually truly want, because that addresses what I mentioned earlier as a significant problem in most enterprises, which is the undersharing problem.
Yeah. And one thing I remember from many years ago, I was taking a course from Professor Lance Hoffman at GW University. I think he's still around as a professor emeritus. And we had Dorothy Denning's book. And in the last chapter on cryptography, she talked about trackers. And the idea being is that you might have a database that, for example, you have census, where I can't say, tell me my neighbor's salary. No, we're not going to tell you that. But you can query it. And then they say, well, if I can query, like, give me everybody in this street, then give everybody who has this type of thing. And it turns out that the intersection of that only ends up being one particular entity, and you might be able to tease out data. And so that's really somebody trying to game the system. But you're talking about a more fundamental issue, which is just let's go ahead and apply the reasonable approach to say, what do you need to get your job done, as compared to the no, which is, well, you can't get it unless you've been given a permission slip.
Yeah.
Now, our laws, however, and we look at disclosure laws and breach notification laws, those are all kind of based on, well, you can't get at that. You may or may not have needed it for your job, but if it gets loose, somehow you've triggered some particular offense. So if you look at things like the NYDFS 500.7, if we look at things like that, which limits user privileges to non-public information, it's a requirement if you're going to comply with that New York Department of Financial Services reg. How does that apply here? Does it? And if so, is there any deficiency in just raw Copilot for 365 that can't get the job done, meaning we need more than that?
Yeah. So first of all, we've talked about the problem at this file level, fixing the file
Mhm.
permissions. Hey, let's not overshare specific content. But with large language models, we actually have a whole new type of problem that is completely unaddressed by fixing problems at the file level. And the reason why is because LLMs are inference engines. They can infer things even if you don't have access to things, or even if you have legitimate access to, let's say, future building space and
Mhm.
future equipment purchases, might you have some insights into how the company's doing, or whether layoffs are pending or not. You may not have access to any layoff documentation, but nonetheless, you can infer things. So when we look at the NYDFS rules, and it says, hey, no MPI can be non-public information, it needs to be properly safeguarded, and so on and so forth. Well, usually they're talking about a very discrete piece of content that you're supposed to properly lock down. But if you think about it, what we're really also truly asking for is even those things that could potentially be inferred. And this is really the bigger challenge, because there is no permission you can block at that level, right?
Mhm.
It's not like you can say, well, restrict access to this file, because it's not about this one particular file. And again, you may have legitimate access to that file as well. Nonetheless, how do you get a machine to understand, wait, hold on, you need to have more discretion. You can't just start, spewing out secrets here. You need to be able to properly safeguard this type of knowledge, this inferred knowledge. And the only way to do that, as far as I can tell, is to actually instruct these large language models with these knowledge boundaries that tell them, here's the boundaries upon which each person, based on their job function, based on the job that they have to do, what they should and should not know.
So really what we have then is an operational challenge where, to make our business more effective, more efficient by providing additional access of information that has then been filtered, if you will, so I don't end up saying, okay, boom, here you go, here's a terabyte of data. Here it is into your LLM, where you had said it's being an inference engine. And so it doesn't just have to recite fact A, fact B, fact C, but it could kind of stitch those together. And yet our permission sets are not based upon anything like that at all. And then that brings me probably to kind of what you guys have been building and what you've been working on, and why it becomes very essential for an enterprise to be able to address these issues, because we've got the liability that exists of oversharing, of improper knowledge management. there is a level of risk associated with that we need to communicate as security professionals to our senior executives. Because IT or the marketing department or somebody, development might be all in saying, let's just go ahead and go after this tool. It's AI. What could possibly go wrong? And even if it's not shadow AI, but it's rather sanctioned, from a security perspective, you don't want to be the voice in the wilderness crying, beware, beware, because you're going to get shouted down by those who want those quick productivity gains. So, how do we add ourselves to the conversation in a way that says, hey, we'll get you there? But in the same reason that you don't want to just hop in a car and start driving without understanding how the seatbelts work and how the brakes work and how a turn signal works and all these essential safety equipment, which are there to help you get to where you're going. Uh, how do we then communicate that effectively? And then I think is the introduction of a tool like you're doing there at Gnostic to say, but wait, there's more.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to be clear that the foundation of what we're doing is systematically capturing and defining, capturing, managing need to know rules within the organization. Think of it as similar to how we do network segmentation. It's what we're doing is knowledge segmentation.
Mhm.
And knowledge segmentation or network segmentation, if you think about it, is also the foundation for something like zero trust. So you can think of, I hate using the term zero trust in a way that isn't quite correct, but in some respects, what we're doing is creating the foundation for establishing a framework to enable AI systems to also adhere to a zero trust model as well. Okay. And in that context, what we're building is a foundation that supports a lot of other things. And those other things include, for example, quickly doing knowledge discovery, okay, finding things that are overshared, but also empowering potentially the next generation of a whole bunch of other security tools. Think knowledge loss prevention, not just data loss prevention. Think, again, knowledge classification, not just data classification. So this whole perspective of moving up this next tier is what we're building out. But the immediate use case that people gravitate towards is that oversharing problem because they're trying to roll out tools like Copilot, and they don't want to be the security guy that basically says, "Sorry, I can't let the business move forward adopting a tool like AI systems because I'm concerned about security problems." You can only hold the train back so long. In fact, for many organizations, they really can't. And so what you have to do is you basically have to go along for the ride. But how can you go along for the ride in a way that helps you quickly understand and assess your risks very proactively? And in our view, the best way to do it is to do an end-to-end test. And the end-to-end test here isn't saying, oh, make sure all your permissions are correct, but rather let's go and just fire away a bunch of sensitive topics at Copilot and see what it returns. Analyze the results, and then see and overlay our need to know rules on top of that to see what is overshared. Again, we start with need to know, and need to know becomes a foundation for satisfying a whole bunch of other use cases that we've all struggled with for a long time. Again, we struggle with data governance for a long time. Anyone here solve it? Nobody, I'm sure. Okay. We solve it to the point where they feel like, oh, this is perfect. But remember, even if it's perfect, you still have an inference problem. And so the challenge that we're seeing here is it does demand a new way of thinking. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not a new way of thinking. It's actually an old way of thinking, but applying the old way of thinking to new technologies that allow us to actually now properly conceptualize and capture need to know rules so that we can do the proper knowledge segmentation inside the organization. And the knowledge segmentation is both for the purposes of understanding what might be overshared or what should be restricted, but more importantly, what should be made available to others so that they can get their job done.
So as we look at that and we say, okay, fine, we are going to go along for the ride, and we're here trying to make our decision makers aware of potentially some of the risks and benefits from a security perspective. We might be able to say, hey, how do we evaluate that? If I can get a boost in productivity, if I can have a user ask 10 questions and they get 8 solid answers back, well, there's 80% right there. But if an unprivileged user asks those questions and they get 4 answers back they shouldn't, then you've got maybe a 40% leak problem. Are those numbers meaningful? And if so, how do we go ahead and either validate that by saying, hey, here's a test script, go run your raw Copilot against your existing enterprise and see how well we score. And that, I think, would be able to provide IT and IT security with a pretty strong business case for why we need something like what you've got. Is that a valid approach?
Yeah, so we look at that. So one of the things that's always challenging with any system is how to measure it. And measuring stuff in AI systems is somewhat challenging as well. And one of the things that I've thought through is how to actually measure the both the improvements on the undersharing part of the problem, but also the risk reduction and the oversharing part. And I think we found a way to do that by creating essentially an upper bound and a lower bound for what people should have a need to know for or not have a need to know for, and to be able to probe for all these different topics that can be unleashed or revealed through tools like Copilot. What we're doing is we're systematically, again, capturing a sense of what is exposed with somebody, for example, who has no permissions to somebody who has a full set of permissions and everything in between. What that allows us to understand then is systematically for a given person with a certain job function, are they getting things that are overshared? Because we can see that from one view, but also the other part, which is, are they getting the things that they should get access to? Again, you don't necessarily know what they should get access to because they may have permissions restricted such that they can't get access to it. Copilot's not going to come back to them with that. But if we have the other upper bounds of understanding what is the realm of possible that Copilot can return with, and let's say, again, on the upper bound, it only returns 8 out of 10 things. Well, that just means that maybe the remaining 2 things, either Copilot just can't get that for you, or it's just not there. Okay. So let's set that as an upper bound and say, look, this is the maximum thing that we can get out of Copilot for us. That's just a really good value to know. And then subsequently, how much of that is actually made available to our employees for the people who do have a need to know so that they can get their job done. Those are all measurements that we can capture now, and it helps us really understand, is this providing both the value and the risk reduction that we're hoping for?
So what we have then is a challenge where can I have some before and after metrics? Is there something that I could measure that would allow me to go ahead and take a look at my current performance in my environment and potentially the risks, some sort of scorecard that says, hey, if I just had raw Copilot 365, this is what's going to happen to me. And then something I can compare the results to afterward, where I go ahead and said, hey, I've done a Gnostic pilot program. It's running. This is my reduction in risk. And now I can quantify that because I know how much a breach report costs. I know what the potential adverse effect is of having lawsuits against my organization. And this is how I can create that value sale. Is this something I could do going forward?
Yeah. So first of all, let's be clear that the notion of measurement is a tough challenge in all of AI. But I've given a lot of thought about this in terms of how do you actually measure both the extent of the oversharing as well as the extent of the undersharing. One represents security risks. The other one really represents business opportunity lost. And the perspective that we have is we can actually understand the upper and lower bounds of that with the methodology that we have. Because what we can do from a security risk standpoint is systematically understand for someone, for example, that has no permissions, what are they actually exposed to? And that sets effectively like a lower bound. And if there is, let's say, somebody with no permissions that gets access to, let's say we were prompting for 10 different things that are sensitive and 4 of them show up. That gives us a lower bound for the security concerns because it means anybody can find these things. On the upper bound of the business potential, what we would do is the exact opposite. Set up a scanning account, for example, that has permissions to everything, and then prompt for a bunch of things that people would need to look for to get their job done, and then see what doesn't return, right? Because what doesn't return, it represents either something that the Copilot system just simply doesn't have or doesn't have access to, or is not capable of properly answering. So you get a sense of what the maximum potential is and the minimum potential. And from there, that sets a baseline for both the security risk that we're trying to reduce, as well as the business opportunity that we can potentially cap. And it's a combination of both that we can bring to the table here.
Right. So we're looking at business opportunity, adding value to the organization, which is always a good thing. being able to reduce the risk, which is going to potentially lower our costs for adverse events, which is, of course, a very good thing as well. So there's kind of goodness all around. So listening to this, and as a user of Microsoft environments, and I've been, I'm right now in the process of rolling out Copilot. I'm thinking, okay, you've given me an awful lot to think about as a CISO, and I'm thinking that for a lot of our listeners or watchers, the same thing. So what are the next steps? If someone said, hey, this looks really cool, I want to do something with this, how would they proceed? How does someone get a
So
hold of you and your company and things like that? And what's their next step?
yeah, so again, the biggest pain point that usually people have from a security standpoint is, hey, is this thing going to overshare and cause a lot of embarrassing situations? Well, the best way to test that is to actually go and test it for yourself by going through Copilot and asking these questions. And what we've done is just basically automated that process so you don't have to do it, and it consumes all the results so that you can then, so that the system can quickly tell you when something is actually being overshared. But you can do this for yourself. And what we're going to do is release a whole bunch of suggested prompts that you try for yourself in your own, in the comfort of your own home or office. And if you find that these things are being divulged, then yeah, give us a call. Let us know if we can help you do this more systematically. And again, these are prompts that are pointing to sensitive business content. Things that the business, by the way, doesn't have to reason over. They know immediately that if someone gets access to things like unresolved legal disputes, or salary information, or forward-looking revenue numbers, and the different things that you should be properly safeguarding and segmenting to only certain individuals, then the business already understands that and will be able to say, okay, we need to take action on these things. So this is not like trying to understand, hey, should we patch a CVSS 9.8 or something? It's like, hey, the business understands this intuitively. This makes that whole discussion with the business side much easier. So that's what we're doing. We're basically saying, let's go and systematically prompt for these sensitive topics, see what evidence emerges around the oversharing that you might be concerned about, and it gives you that assurance to know, is it going to actually happen or not? And as you may imagine, in every instance that we've tried, it does happen. You just want to be able to understand how big of a breadbox is this. And that's what we do. What we help you do is also just do it on a systematic, repeated basis, because there's always drift. There's always new content coming in. And you want to do this not just for a small subset of topics, but hundreds of sensitive topics. And so we've scaled that out to be able to do that for a large number of different user profiles and different topics. But let's go back to my earlier point. My earlier point about what undergirds what we're doing is having a need-to-know rule set in place. And all the results that you get back, if you don't have that policy understood, then you won't really know what's actually overshared, because sometimes things are appropriate for certain individuals and they're not appropriate for others. And that need to know policy, or that rule set, is what you need to overlay to be able to really understand what to action, because there's a lot of stuff that's legitimately shared, but there's things that you don't want to share with, again, others. And the only way to know that very systematically and repeatedly is by starting with need to know from the very beginning.
Got it. So that makes really good sense. And so the need to know at this point is, how do I get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, so
Gnostic, KNOSTIC.ai.
that's right.
And they just go to the website and they can find information they need. Do they need to contact somebody in particular?
Yeah, we have a form that you can fill out that
Okay.
queues you up for outreach. And for those who know me, and certainly if you're at RSA, come check us out at the Innovation Sandbox. And if not that, then we have other events and things going on throughout the week. We'd love to be able to catch up with you. Just hit us on a DM over LinkedIn or some other place, and we'll track you down.
That sounds excellent. Well, Sounil Yu, thank you very much for being part of CISO Tradecraft. I found this absolutely fascinating when I first heard about what you're working on at Black Hat last year, and now I'm going to get a chance to spend some time with you at RSA. Plus, thank you for the kind contribution of your time and your expertise to our show. I think a lot of our listeners have a better sense of how AI creates all these great opportunities, but of course, they're not going to tell you about the risks or challenges, but that's exactly what we've addressed here, and what you've come up with as a solution with your tool set. So that's awesome, and I think this was time very well spent. So for our listeners and our viewers, if you like CISO Tradecraft, give us a thumbs up or a 5-star or whatever feedback you get. Let other people know where you're getting your information so we can help them in their careers as well. Until next time, this is your host, G. Mark Hardy. Thank you very much for being part of our CISO Tradecraft family. And until next time, stay safe out there.